Well, hello and welcome to Tips for the Transition. I'm María Tomás-Keegan. I'm passionate about helping women move beyond coping and surviving those major life events that can happen to us so we can learn to thrive. How many of you have found yourself in a pattern of making bad choices one after the other, not learning from the mistakes of the past? I've done it. I know a lot of us who have done it without even realizing it and without realizing why. My guest today is going to tell us a story about her marriage and divorce and how she continued her pattern of picking the wrong men in her life. When she finally recognized how this pattern affected her, she started on her own journey of transformation. I'd like to introduce to you Murielle Fellous, who was raised in France, and you will soon be able to tell that by her lovely accent. Hello, Murielle.
Hi, Maria. How are you?
I'm well, and welcome to this edition of Tips for the Transition.
Thank you. I thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So let's jump right into this. Please tell us about your pattern of choices, how it affected you, and how it led to your life's work.
So what I always tell people is I think that I have earned the title of queen of attracting the wrong guy to me or choosing the wrong guy. I definitely had that title and that crown because I started very early. And after quite some struggle with my love relationships when I was young, I found someone who I thought was safe because he was older than me, 13 years older actually. And I thought I was safe. I said, finally, a good guy, because I used to really attract, the narcissist, self-absorbed guys. This man seemed really different. So I got married, and the fact that I found him very different was very reassuring to me. But when you're talking about patterns, what I didn't realize is that in order to feel safe, I had picked a man who had a problem with drinking, had a problem with alcoholism, which I didn't detect, was passive aggressive. So he was letting me make all the decisions. And that's why I felt safe, because I was in control. But that was the opposite of safe, because I then had to become the man of the relationship, which I hated. On a professional level, for quite some time, I was the breadwinner, and I had to assume all the responsibilities of the relationship. What I now realize is that there are many forms of narcissists, and we are used to the guy who's has a lot of bravado, is very show off, comes across, seems to have a lot of self-confidence and charisma. But there is the other side of the picture where someone who does not take responsibility for his actions, who's always blaming the world and anybody else but him when something happens, is also a narcissist. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't recognize that. And because I was raised in France, where you have to be proper, you have to be polite, you have to be the good girl, I stayed 10 years in that marriage, even though in the middle of it, when I was really unhappy, because as I said, I had to assume a role that shouldn't have been mine, the man, the masculine energy in the relationship, I went and I voiced that to him. And his answer was like, you don't know how to love. You should accept me the way I am. I have nothing to change in me. And it's very funny that sometimes we're going to trick ourselves into staying in a comfort zone, even though we know in the back of our head that it's not what we want, what we need, what we should stay in. At that time, I convinced myself that he was right, because he was American. So I came to a country where I had no family. When 5 years into the marriage, I had no green card yet. It was in process, so I couldn't really make it on my own, or I thought so. I just stayed in the situation because I was afraid. I already had 2 kids, and I said, you know what? I'm going to make that work. And that's one of the big mistakes we make in relationships. I'm going to do all the work. I stayed 5 more years. Of course, more and more unhappy, more and more frustrated, with feeling like I was in front of a wall that I couldn't break, I couldn't go around, and I couldn't surmount. I felt stuck. And I got to a point where, about a 10-year mark, I just needed to get out. But it was all under the surface. I was like, you know, when you have this beautiful flame in us that makes us alive, this beautiful life force energy, it was going down and down and down. And I was like a shadow of myself. I remember I had some friends who came from Israel, because I lived 10 years in Israel. That's where I met my ex-husband. They came to see me. They said, what happened to you? You're not the same. That's because I was unhappy. By that time, I had a 3rd kid. And the way because I didn't feel that I had the right to be happy, and because I didn't give myself permission to leave the relationship in the name of happiness. That's not what we do in my family. As a woman, you take care of the family. You don't just go selfish and decide that you're not happy, so you end the marriage. I stayed. I forced myself to stay. But thank God there is something in us that's longing for more, that's longing for healing. And mine came in a very traumatic way, because I ended up meeting someone who told me, I'm going to save you. And I hang to that possibility. I didn't know at the time that I had the strength to do it myself. I didn't know that I would manage. I thought I needed someone to save me. So about 2 months before I ended my marriage, I started that relationship, which for me was I don't like lies. I'm usually I have a lot of integrity. So I was living a lie. I couldn't stay like that. And I don't know if it was an unconscious desire to be caught by my ex-husband, because I told him I wanted to divorce, but he refused. He found out. So he exposed me to, I'm Jewish, and I was very involved in the Jewish community. He went everywhere and told them that his wife has cheated on him with somebody who was not Jewish. So that's it. For them, I was going to hell. I remember my kids were in a Jewish school, and they were telling my kids, your mom is not going to heaven. It was such a shock, which now I'm grateful for, because you know how you always, at least I shouldn't say you, I need to own my stuff. I was craving for approval from the outside world. When that happened, everybody turned their face the other way. I lost practically all my friends. It forced me to cut that codependency cord that I had with the outside world, and realize that I need my own approval, and that I could be alive, happy, and fully functioning without the approval of others. But I'm saying that now, but it was a very difficult thing to go through. And my deep desire today is, one, to help women who are in that situation to understand that you can do it on your own and you can exit elegantly. Because I ended up paying the price for about 8 years after my divorce. I felt guilty. So of course, as a guilty one, you expect punishment. And I did create the punishment for myself, because I continued making choices that led me to be unhappy, to not be valued, etc., etc. So that's really, now I can say that on a spiritual level, I know my ex-husband is my ally, because he made me change. I was forced to change. But at the time, it was very traumatic and very difficult. And I hoped that I could have had a friend or a coach or someone to hold my hand and tell me, build yourself up, you can do it.
Wow. That is a story. You know, Murielle, it's funny. I was raised here in the United States, and I still felt the same way as you did about needing to be the good girl. And I was raised that way as well. Of course, I was raised by a European father, so that probably had a lot to do with the similarity in our upbringing and what we carried with us into adulthood that made us feel like we had to stay in bad relationships longer than we should have.
Yeah.
So some powerful insights you just shared with us. So I really appreciate your being so vulnerable and sharing that story. I can't wait until we meet again, because I know that in the next segment, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to tell us about what you learned after you left your marriage. And I think it may surprise our viewers. So, thank you, Murielle. Until the next time we meet, it won't be long. Meanwhile, Murielle has offered a free gift for our viewers, and it's called 10 Signs He's Not the One. The link to get your copy is right at the bottom of the screen here, or you can look below the video for a link as well. I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan. Till next time.